Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Perrin Beatty, and I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. The Canadian Chamber represents some 200,000 businesses of all sizes and sectors from across Canada, and these businesses support our families and our communities and our country. With me today are colleagues from across the tourism and travel sector, including Beth Potter, who's the President and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, Susie Grynol, who is the President and CEO of the Hotel Association of Canada, Daniel Robert Gooch, who is the President of the Canada Airports Council, and Mike McNaney, who is the President and CEO of the National Airlines Council of Canada. Now, we've joined together, along with several other businesses and associations, to create the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable. Our goal is to encourage the government to develop a clear plan for the safe reopening of the travel and tourism sector. I'd like to acknowledge the Ottawa Airport Authority and to thank them for hosting us at Canada's National Airport today. Now, standing here today reminds us of the devastating impact of the pandemic on the travel and tourism sector. And it provides a reminder of how much all of our lives have changed since March of 2020. We called this press conference today to underscore the dire situation facing the Canadian travel and tourism industry and to call on the federal government to take concrete steps to prevent permanent damage to the sector by providing a clear and comprehensive plan for safely reopening our country. Canadians deserve clarity on what life after the pandemic will look like and how we will get there. Now, this past weekend, Prime Minister Trudeau was in the United Kingdom to attend the G7 summit. The G7 communique, which was endorsed by Canada, included this statement, quote, "We recognize the importance to the global economy of safely restarting international travel by land, air, and sea, and multilateral efforts to achieve this." It continued, "We recognize that this will need a set of common standards for travel, including interoperability and mutual recognition of digital applications, testing requirements, recognition of vaccination status, including exemptions and comparable criteria for when responsive measures may be required." That commitment couldn't be more clear. What's also clear is that while Canada is a world leader in the percentage of its citizens who are vaccinated, we remain a clear outlier among our G7 peers in not having a comprehensive reopening plan. International discussions are important, but Canada needs a plan of its own, and it needs it now. Together, we're calling on the government to take a number of immediate steps. First, we need a comprehensive national plan for the reopening of our economy. Second, Canadians have a right to know the criteria for reopening the Canada-US border. We understand that Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden discussed this issue on the margins of the G7, but we've seen no plan, and we have no idea of what the government's intentions are for when the current closure expires a week from today. And third, we need a clear vaccination certification process to speed reopening and to support the recovery of the Canadian economy. These measures are important for the survival of the travel and tourism industry, but they're also essential for the people that this sector serves. For example, in the most recent Canadian survey on business conditions, 1/4 of the companies surveyed said that travel restrictions were a problem for their businesses. And we regularly hear that these restrictions prevent companies from meeting new customers for business development or undertaking technician services that can't be conducted remotely. Now, Canadians have done their part by getting vaccinated. Now's the time to provide clear, timely, and safe guidance on reopening travel. Canadians and Canadian businesses don't want to be left behind. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend Beth Potter, the President and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, to speak about the importance of the travel and tourism sector in Canada. Beth.
Good morning, and thank you, Perrin. Just before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land and the unceded territories of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who call this land home. We offer them our respect and our thanks for their contributions, past and present. As the President and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, it is my privilege and responsibility to represent the suite of sectors that make up our visitor economy. Tourism is more than restaurants and hotels and airplanes. It encompasses festivals, events, attractions, outdoor experiences like camping, fishing, and hiking. Visitors travel by plane, train, automobile, RV, boat, and bike. The visitor economy in Canada includes leisure travel, such as vacations or visiting friends and relatives. But it is also an industry that brings businesses together through business travel, meetings, and conferences. Canada's travel and tourism industry is a powerful economic driver. Prior to COVID-19, our industry generated $105 billion a year in economic activity and employed 1.8 million Canadians and was growing. International tourism is crucial to stimulating international trade and foreign investment. However, since the onset of the pandemic, this sector has seen unprecedented challenges. Hundreds of thousands of employees have lost their jobs. Some have moved on permanently to other industries and will not return to our suite of sectors. Connectivity across our country has either been lost or completely or has been seriously impacted, and countless businesses have been forced to close. The pandemic has created a crisis in Canada's tourism and travel sector industry unlike anything seen before, and recovery may be years away. More than ever, clarity on what life looks like going forward is needed. The Canada-US border has been closed to non-essential travel since March 2020. Medical experts are telling us that we are winning the battle with COVID. With vaccinations rising and case numbers going down, we must now pivot to more forward-thinking policies and talk about safely reopening the border and ending the extreme financial crush that has flattened the tourism industry and devastated the visitor economy in Canada. As other countries start welcoming travelers to their countries, Canada has fallen behind. So we must prepare to open the border quickly and safely, and in turn, restart our visitor economy. Without question, now is the time for the federal government to put in place an evidence-based plan to reopen the border and to restart travel. Equally important is the need for federal leadership on travel within Canada. Canadians should be able to freely travel across our country. In the absence of a nationwide plan, we are seeing a patchwork of policies roll out provincially that creates confusion for travelers. Provinces are filling in the gaps, resulting in potentially 13 different travel policies, a result that is unnecessary and cumbersome. Canadians deserve a single national policy approach to travel that clarifies the country's policy on vaccination certification, our international border, unvaccinated minors, partially vaccinated Canadians, and other critical details that require national leadership. The time for soon is behind us. The time is now. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I now will turn it over to my colleague, Susie Grynol, President and CEO of the Hotel Association of Canada. Thank you.
Throughout the pandemic, hotels answered the call of public health. Hotels served as 14-day quarantine facilities for repatriated Canadians, provided a safe place for frontline workers to self-isolate, and offered shelter to the vulnerable. Most recently, we were asked to provide government-approved accommodation for returning travelers, which experts found likely improved quarantine compliance in Canada. But the time has come to transition away from restrictive measures and move towards a safe reopening plan based on science. That is what the expert advisory panel recommended, and our members are fully supportive of this approach. We welcome the government's recent decision to remove government-approved accommodation requirements for fully vaccinated Canadian travelers. This is a step in the right direction, but it does not go far enough. Policy should be rooted in science, and the science says that fully vaccinated travelers should be exempt from quarantine. Nationality has nothing to do with it. Today, we are encouraging the federal government to heed the advice of the COVID-19 Testing and Screening Expert Advisory Panel and to provide clear, timely, and safe guidance on reopening Canada for travel and reopening the Canada-US border. The data today justifies a renewed approach to border measures, ongoing testing requirements, and quarantine restrictions for vaccinated Canadians and foreign nationals. There is no more time to waste. Canada cannot afford to be left behind as other countries around the world begin to reopen. We cannot lose the second summer in a row. Without a clear plan in place, our vibrant tourism industry is at risk, and we will lose the anchor businesses like hotels that provide the critical infrastructure in our communities. Families have been separated for too long. Couples are anxious to be reunited. Everyone just needs a date and a plan to plan towards. I'd like to hand it over now to my colleague Daniel Gooch, President of the Canadian Airports Council, who will touch on the importance of a national travel plan for airports.
Thank you, Susie, and good morning. As one of the sectors hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, travel and tourism has faced significant hardship over the last 7 months. Demand has been devastated. 2020 saw total passenger volumes in Canada fall by more than 90%. So far, 2021 has been even worse. Canada's airports have stayed open to support essential travel, shipment of vaccines, transit of healthcare workers, and more. They have played a vital role in maintaining our country's critical supply chains and ensuring they are maintained. But now we're looking toward recovery. We're looking to restore access to Canada for international travelers safely and return direct international access to communities that have lost it. There is a significant demand to travel across Canada and the world. We need the federal government to lay out a plan so that Canadians and those seeking to safely travel to Canada know what to expect in the coming months. As airports, we need a clear plan so that we can properly prepare and travelers can pass through our airports smoothly and with confidence. Other countries have done this. Our sector depends on this. Canadians expect this. And now Mike McNaney, President and CEO of the National Airlines Council of Canada, will speak specifically about the importance of a national plan for Canada's major airlines.
Thank you, Daniel. My comments will be very brief. I know I'm the last member of the federal family here, tourism family, to speak. There is nothing revolutionary in what we are asking the federal government to do. All the public policy issues that are tied to restart are being investigated and are being moving forward by other countries. We are simply asking the federal government to do the same thing for Canada. Aviation connectivity, of course, has been significantly impacted throughout the pandemic. Billions of dollars in aircraft have sat parked. Tens of thousands of jobs have disappeared. The number of flights the city pairs served, including the time of day in which you can actually get service, has all been drastically reduced. Restoring connectivity and restoring this level of service is going to be critical to our recovery. And the most effective way to restore connectivity is for consumers and for industry to have a very clear understanding, a very fulsome understanding of what the government's path is going forward. Absent that, we are all simply planning in the dark. The countries that do plan their restart properly, they are going to take, they are going to win, they are going to steal, whichever word you wish to use. They are going to take market share, investment, and jobs from countries that do not plan well. Canada cannot afford to be in that latter category. All the policy variables are fully known. The expert panel report is fully known. International restart plans abound for the government to take a look at. The simple reality is that there is no basis, there is no justification for not bringing forth a restart plan and doing so rapidly. Thank you. I'll now turn it back to Perrin.
Thank you very much. That's the end of our written remarks. With that, I'd like to pass it over to open it up for any questions from the floor.
This is a much more polite, orderly group than I remember the House of Commons being in my day.
Okay, if there are no questions here, we'll pass it over to the operator to ask for any questions from the line.
Ladies and gentlemen, should you have any questions, please press star 1. Your first question comes from Chris Reynolds with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, folks. Thanks very much for taking our question. I'm getting quite a loud, distracting echo, so forgive me if I stumble over my words here. I suppose I'm wondering to what extent Canada really lags behind other countries in its lack of criteria for establishing a recovery plan and a reopening of borders. Is this actually so different from some other Western countries? And is there one set of criteria in particular that you would recommend to the government? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me just repeat the question briefly to make sure everyone can hear. The question was, does Canada significantly lag other countries in terms of having a reopening plan? And then secondly, are there specific criteria that we would be looking for in that sort of a plan? The answer to the first part is yes, we are well behind other countries. The great irony here is that Canada is a world leader when it comes to first shots, first vaccinations. And yet we're a world laggard when it comes to having a plan for reopening. So we're seeing in Europe today a systematic plan to ensure that people can move across borders in Europe. We're seeing in the United States the reopening of the United States economy and the restoration of movement within the United States. We saw record movements taking place over the Memorial Day weekend, and all of the projections over the course of the summer are for enormous amount of travel. The Americans will have a very robust tourist season, unlike Canada. And we see in other countries as well that they're putting in place the elements for a reopening plan. We need to have that in Canada, and it's important to understand that it's not like throwing a light switch where the government will make a decision one day that it's okay to reopen. You can throw a light switch and suddenly all of our hotels, all of our airports, all of our restaurants are all open and functioning. We need lead time, and we need to do that in conjunction with the private sector. In terms of criteria, the most important thing is that they be coherent, that we not have 13 or 14 different standards in Canada. We need clarity. We need to know where we stand so that businesses can plan and so that Canadians can make their plans for the summer for this tourist season. And we need to ensure that what we're doing is done in concert as well with other countries to make it as smooth as possible for people to be able to travel internationally. Most importantly, what we're calling for is we need a plan. We need it now. Everybody needs to know what it is.
Chris, do you have any follow-up?
I suppose my follow-up would be, what about a 75% first vaccination level as a criteria for something beyond what is already planned for the first stages of reopening and border reopening as well? Do we have even more particulars on vaccination rates that you would recommend?
Chris, I think, let me just first of all repeat the question. In terms of specific criteria, what about a 75% criterion for vaccination, and are there other criteria that we would be looking at? Governments will have to set the criteria, and they'll do so in conjunction with public health officials. They will look probably at a wide variety of criteria. What rate of vaccination do you have? What is the infection rate? What direction is it traveling in? What sort of capacity do we have in our hospitalization system, and in particularly in intensive care systems? All of these are criteria that governments have used around the world in terms of establishing an opening plan. And we're glad to work with government and with public health officials to help to develop criteria that make sense. The important thing is that we have a plan and that we know what that plan is. We are 1 week away today from the expiration of the current closure of the Canada-US border. 1 week from today, is the government simply going to roll that over for another month? We don't know. How can you plan if you don't know? We're seeing other countries around the world saying they're opening their borders to allow people who are fully vaccinated to be able to travel. And yet we have no system in Canada to be able to certify people to international standards for having been vaccinated. We need to have criteria. Even the small announcement that was made by the government last week with regard to lifting some of the restrictions sometime next month on Canadians and permanent residents in terms of the quarantine if they have been double vaccinated, we still don't have the details about what about children who are traveling with their parents and who are not eligible for vaccination at this point. There are all sorts of details that we need to have, and we are anxious to work with government to develop those details, but we need to have the strategy and we need to have it now.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mesdames et messieurs, à titre de rappel, si vous souhaitez poser vos questions, appuyez sur étoile 1. Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, should you have a questions, please press star 1. Your next question comes from Trevor Johnson as a freelance reporter. Trevor, please go ahead.
Hi there. You made a reference earlier to the Government of Canada's COVID-19 expert advisory panel. Is there anything you're calling for today that is different from what the government's experts have recommended?
What we're calling for is more sorry, let me first of all repeat the question. We referred to the expert advisory panel, and the question is there anything we're calling for here that goes beyond what was called for by the panel? Yes, we're calling for a more comprehensive strategy than was mentioned there. But we would have been delighted to have seen the government accept the recommendations of the panel. And it's important to understand that the expert panel made those recommendations at the beginning of April, at the height of the current wave of the pandemic, when infection rates were very high and when vaccination rates were much lower. And yet the government's action on that has fallen far short of what was recommended by the experts under very different circumstances. What I'd like to do is turn to colleagues who may want to comment on some of the areas, such as on the Canada-US border and the need to reopen that and to have clear criteria. Any colleague who'd like to add? Beth?
So I was speaking with my colleague, my counterpart in the US last week, and he was telling me about the first trade show that has been held in Las Vegas with 30,000 delegates. Tonight we're going to see the Canadiens play in Vegas in front of 25,000 fans. Neither of those two activities would be possible here in Canada. But we can be there. We can be ready to do that if we have a plan in order to move forward. So we're working with our colleagues in the States. We're working with our colleagues here in Canada to try and just raise the urgency of this message, that without a plan, businesses are going to be stagnant. Businesses could potentially close their doors permanently. There is a very real possibility that if we don't have a summer season this year, Canada could lose 75% of its tourism businesses in the small and medium-sized category. That is a profound impact on an economy, on the economic contribution that we make to this country. We need a plan, and we need it now. Anybody else?
other questions?
Trevor, do you have any follow-up?
One follow-up, just in response to your comment on the Canadians traveling to Las Vegas. In your view, is that something, does that show that it's safe to go between borders once travelers are fully vaccinated?
It does. They are, as a team, they're following strict protocols. The NHL has had a safe play protocol in place for the entire season, both here in Canada and in the United States. They're following those protocols, and they're able to play against different teams, play in front of fans, and travel the border. If there can be a plan for our NHL teams, why can't there be a plan for the rest of Canadians?
Thank you. There are no further questions at this time. You may proceed.
I wonder whether I can just piggyback. On the last question and just make a couple of points. We saw there's some 300,000 Canadians who are snowbirds who go down south each winter, and they came back. At some point, government has to decide whether being vaccinated is meaningful and whether it's prepared to adjust government regulations that affect people's mobility based on whether or not they've been vaccinated. We took people's grandmothers and required them to go into quarantine hotels when they came back, notwithstanding the fact that they were doubly vaccinated. If government wants to encourage people to get vaccinated, the argument that they use, quite correctly, is the reason for being vaccinated is that if we are vaccinated, we are less likely to contract the disease ourselves, and we are less likely to give it to somebody else. Government regulations should reflect that fact and need to be adjusted to ensure that there's a clear understanding and that the incentive is there for people to go out and to be vaccinated. Another point that I would make, we're seeing particularly on the West Coast this year, the second summer where the cruise ship industry will not be visiting Canadian ports. And in the case of the West Coast, the loss is going to be enormous in Victoria and in Vancouver, literally tens of millions of dollars. The Centers for Disease Control and other authorities in the United States are requiring that people on cruise ships in the United States be fully vaccinated, both crew and passengers. The likelihood that you would contract COVID from somebody in one of those ships is lower than that you would contract it at the local post office. And yet, we have banned those cruise ships from Canadian harbors. The result has been that the U.S. Congress has passed legislation exempting cruise ships from the requirement that they stop at a foreign port when they are going between two U.S. ports, that is, between Seattle and Alaska. And there's legislation before the U.S. Congress at the present time to abolish that requirement permanently. The impact of that for Canada would be billions of dollars with no benefit for public health, but with devastating consequences for local economies and for the tourism and travel sector. So this is why government policy has to be adjusted and has to be brought up to date. Let me then finally conclude just by simply saying that thanking you again for coming today. The travel and tourism industry is part of Canada's national strategic infrastructure. Businesses in the sector employ 1.8 million Canadians across the country. And these workers and all Canadians now deserve clarity on what life looks like after the pandemic. Addressing these issues cannot wait any longer for fear of long-lasting changes and more job losses. I reiterate our call for the federal government to immediately release a comprehensive national plan to reopen our economy, to release its strategy for reopening the Canada-US border, and to put in place a clear vaccination certification process to support the recovery of the industry and the Canadian economy. We are anxious to work with the government in these matters, and we hope to see some positive developments in the near future. Thank you so much for being with us today. Okay, thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes your conference call for today.